Greetings, my little guzzlers. Camden IPA again tonight. Oh, I haven't got any room. Well, we're going to make a veggie dish. Now, you could make this vegan, but we're using cheese, and that's normal cheese, so that's not vegan. But if you're a vegetarian who's quite happy with cheese, dairy cheese, then it's vegetarian. And if you want to make it vegan, get some vegan cheese. Other than that, it would be a vegan dish. Because we're going to bake what apparently is a speciality of the Canary Islands, i.e. this is a Spanish dish. And you can either make it as like a tapas, or you can make it as like an accompaniment, or in our case, the reason I've got so many, I've got 6, is that we're going to make it as a main course on its own. We're not having anything else with it. That is a courgette. And that's what you call it in most of Europe and the UK. If you're in America, you call it zucchini or zucchini, I think. And I thought, hang on, we're not doing American. But apparently, if you lived in Italy, you would also call it a zucchini, because zucchini is the Italian for that. Courgette is the French for that. But I've always known them as courgettes. So we've got 6 courgettes here. By the way, if you was in South Africa, it's a small marrow, which is essentially what it is. All right? So, we're going to make Bubangos Rellenos de Champiñones, or something a bit like that if you speak Spanish, i.e. stuffed courgette with mushrooms. And actually it's got onion and it's got cheese in it. So that's what we're making tonight, stuffed courgettes. Get your oven on at 180 fan. You're going to want some cheese, like I said, some flour, some oil, some chives, some thyme, some onions, garlic, some milk and some mushrooms. And that is it. So before we start preparing the rest of the ingredients and cooking them up, I've got here some baking trays lined with kitchen towel. Now, because I'm doing 6, I need 2 baking trays. The original recipe was from Spain on a fork again, and in which case his recipe was for 3 courgettes. You'd probably get, you would only need 1 tray. But what we want to do with our courgettes, and unfortunately most courgettes in the UK get a little bit kinked, okay, which isn't necessarily conducive with what we want to do with it. But all we're going to do start with is just trim off the ends, okay, and then what we're going to do is slice it longitudinally. That's lengthways for you people who are not posh. Now I need to get a bowl out. Oh, and got one in there. Well, one of them I do. Everyone in my posh bowls. And what you want to do for each one of these is we're just going to scrape out the seeds on the inside, but don't go all the way to the end, okay, because what we're wanting to create is like a little trough. We're making a mini canoe. Where's me Barbie? I'm making a Barbie canoe, or a Ken. Whoops, went a bit close to the end then. So we're just going to scrape out the pulp to create that. Okay, for now I'm just going to put them to one side. We're keeping the pulp, not throwing that away, we're using that. So I'm just going to carry on and do that with each of these courgettes. Trim them the ends, slice them in half, scoop the middles out like that, leaving ends on it. keep the pulp, and then I'll show you what we're doing next, because there's another little step we're going to do with them before we start doing the rest of it. Right, so that's all my pulp out. I'm just going to put that to one side. Like I say, we're using that. Now, what we want to do now is we're going to need some salt. Now, we want to sort of draw some of the moisture out. So what I'm doing is just putting some salt into each one, and then we're just going to lay it upside down on the what's the name, paper towel. Couldn't think of what the bloody hell the stuff was called then. Okay, now you might be thinking, cross, there's a lot of salt going in there, we don't want all that. We will be wiping this out, okay, so don't worry too much about the salt that's going in there. We just sort of, in a way, want to just dry them out a bit. Now, I said to you, Albert said this was a speciality of the Canary Islands. The Canary Islands are basically part of Spain, so it is a Spanish dish. Okay, so the Canary Islands are a group of 7 main islands, which obviously are nowadays considered sort of Spanish territory, if you like. And it's a big tourist destination. So I suppose it does depend where you live. If you live in Europe, you've probably been there. If you live in over America, you might not have done, because obviously it's a bit of a trek over there for you Americans. But that's them sorted, and now we're just going to put these to one side for about 15 minutes or so. And that will give us time to prepare the onion and mushrooms. Want one large onion. It can be red, it can be white, brown, whatever onion you want. Okay. I didn't really have a particularly large one, so I've got like 3 smallish ones here. And what we want to do with the onions, once I peeled them as such, is we just want to dice these up. Okay. You're going to want mushrooms. Now, for 6 courgettes, you're going to want about 500 grams. You can have any mushrooms you like. I've just got straightforward white mushrooms there. Again, they're going to want to be cut up. We want to slice them up. Okay, and then you're going to want about 8 cloves of garlic. It's quite heavy on the old garlic, which you'll quite like, obviously. If you've been paying attention over these years, you know that. But this one generally does have a lot of garlic in it. But I'm going to use the whole bulb of garlic, because they're not very big bulbs of garlic, these. This one don't want to peel. There you go, that got you, yeah, bugger. Oh, no. So, the Canary Islands, you may have heard of some of them. In order of size, the largest is Tenerife. Then you've got Fuerteventura. You've got Gran Canaria. You've got Lanzarote, La Palma. And then a couple I've never heard of. La Gomora, I don't know, something like that. And El Hierro or something like that. Again, I've not heard of them last 2. Obviously Lanzarote, Tenerife. Oh, this onion's driving me mad. Well, this bit is anyway. They're all sort of ones I've been to. I think I've been to La Palma as well. But they are a huge tourist destination, actually, as well. The islands are volcanic. There are also other smaller islands, but they tend not to be sort of visited, if you like. But they are volcanic, and in fact, there is an active, or has been an active volcano in the Canary Islands. but also because of the height of these mountains or these volcanoes, because they reach above a certain layer in the air, they also are very good for atmospheric conditions for telescopes. So there's sort of like some quite important observatories on some of these higher mountaintops. So all I'm going to do with these, like I said, is I just want to dice these up nice and small. Right, I've chopped the onions, I've peeled my garlic. Now, I said to you, you want about 500 grams of mushrooms, and what we want to do with them is slice them up. Okay, you're going to want about 240 grams of cheese. Now, as obviously Albert on Spain in the Fork says, ideally you would do something like manchego, a Spanish cheese, but basically you can use any cheese you like. You want, for this quantity, 2 tablespoons of plain flour. You want 2 teaspoons of chives. Now, unfortunately, Tesco's, who are very out of favour at the minute, that may well be the last time we ever shop at Tesco's, but that's for completely different reasons. But they didn't have any fresh chives, so I've got dried chives. You want about a teaspoon of dried thyme. In this case, you do actually want the dried thyme. Now, you're going to want at least 45 mils of olive oil. You might need a bit extra because obviously the amount of courgettes and that we're doing, so you might want to use double that. And milk. You want 245 grams of milk, or mils. It can be full fat, it can be semi-skimmed, it can be skim milk, it doesn't matter. But what you do want to do is get it at room temperature. Because when we add it, what we don't want it doing is curdling. So that's all your ingredients. So what I'm going to do now is start cooking some of this, so I've got a bit more room for me mushroom. I've got a large enough pan that I'm going to cook this in, and I'm going to put this on about a medium heat. And at the moment, oops, I've got about 60 mils of oil. Okay, in that goes. Like I say, we might need to add a little bit more. So I'll put that over there because it's leaking a little bit. Well, not leaking, but you run over the edge. And then we're going to cook for about 3 or 4 minutes till they start going a bit translucent, the onion. Now, I said to you about the Canary Islands. They're off the coast of Africa, about 60 miles. But they are the southernmost autonomous community of Spain, like I said, Spanish territory. And actually, going back to the days when the Spaniards were colonising the Americas, the islands used to be a stopping point for the galleons. A, just to make sure everything was ready to go, and B, because it helped them pick up the winds and the currents to bring them obviously across the Atlantic to the Americas. Right, so I'm now just going to put them onions in there. Okay. And like I say, what we want to do, I should have perhaps kept them separate on a plate, is we just want to cook these gently on that medium heat till they sort of start going a little bit translucent. And then we're going to be adding in that garlic. But in the meantime, I need to carry on chopping them mushrooms. Canary Islands. Obviously, named after the Canaries that were there. Were they fuck? Nothing to do with that. It's actually to do with dogs. They've been cooking a little bit now. Mushrooms are ready, so what we're going to do is we're now just going to chuck these mushrooms in at this stage. Okay. Wait, come back here, little bugger. Ooh, not your garlic yet. Don't go down there, you little bugger. Don't go there. And now we want just to get them mixed in, and we want to saute down those mushrooms. Get them cooked nicely. Cook them through. Get them nice and soft and sort of brownish, if you like. And this is why you might need to add some more oil. Now, if you were doing half this quantity, which on Albert's site he talks about just using 3 courgettes, and actually they're probably not quite as big as some of these courgettes. He uses half this quantity, so he says that about 45 mils of oil. But I think, given the quantity we got there, like I say to you, I went for 60 mils there, but I think because I doubled the quantities, we want about 90 mils, so I'm just going to add a bit more in. Okay, so it is just now a matter of just cooking, like I say, this through. Now your cheese wants to be grated. Mine was some cheddar that we'd already bought previously, that was already bagged and grated. If you're going for the full authentic, as Albert would say, you use the Spanish olive oil. We haven't got any olive oil, I forgot to buy some. This is Cotswold Gold rapeseed oil, which I use for most of my baking and things like that, which I haven't done an awful lot at the moment. And he also says I like using Manchego cheese, but again he said it doesn't really matter. Now, I was saying to you about these Canary Islands. Although they were part of Spain, well, they are now part of Spain, it's believed, there's my beard all the way over there, couldn't find it. Actually, before I get to that, I was just saying to you about, obviously it's named after or Canaries are named because they come from the Canary Islands, and they don't. Canaries are named after the Canary Islands, but it's not because that's where Canaries particularly come from. I said to you, it's actually to do with dogs. It's a Latin. Canis is the Latin for dog. Actually, in my Latin lessons when I was at school, that was one of the first words we learned. Caecilius est pater. Caecilius was the name of the father. Pater. Something, oh, I can't think his wife's name. Something et mater. She was his, the mother. But also, they had a dog, a canis. Can't remember the dog's name. But it's believed the name Canary comes from the Latin or canis, or a derivative of it, Canaria insula, i.e. the island of the dogs. Not dogs as we know dogs today, but actually it's believed it refers to what they at the time called sea dogs, or the monk seals that used to inhabit the islands. They were known as sea dogs, and so the islands were named after these dogs, i.e. the island of the dogs, the Canary Islands. So there you go. In England, in London, we have Canary Wharf. And Canary Wharf, as it happens, is in the Isle of Dogs, which is a part of London. But it's called Canary Wharf because that's on the riverfront. Okay, big trading area, you know, River Thames. Actually, I think that's more than enough oil in there. That's going to do fine. So we just still want to keep him cooking them down. But the Isle of Dogs, they had a big warehouse. Oh, I almost drank that bloody milk then. Oh, in that region, and it used to essentially handle all the imports from the Canary Islands. So they decided to call the area, or call that place, Canary Wharf. Right, now this pulp actually is quite dry. If it is quite, you know, they're perhaps not quite as ripe as he's had, put them through a sieve and using a spoon, not a little spoon like that, but something like a wooden spoon, squeeze it, all the moisture you can out of it. But to be honest, this is quite dry. So we're now going to put that pulp back in there. Okay, like I said, we waste nothing. And I don't need that, so that can go in there. Whoops, I don't normally live down there. Oh no, it will piss me off if I put it down there, because when I put my frying pan away later, that'll be in the way. So now I just want to mix this in, and we're now just going to cook that pulp through with that. Now, while it's doing that, we're going to salt these courgette halves out. So like I said, we don't want this idea of the salt, and to be honest, there's not, like I said to you, that pulp wasn't particularly wet, but what we're trying to do is remove some of that moisture. So I'm just using a paper towel just to remove that salt. I might have to swap my paper towel over, I think. Because what we're trying to do, oh, excuse me, cow. It's my little friend there. We might add some salt later, but we don't want that excessive amount of salt that's in there. So I'm just removing the salt. And like I say, hopefully some of the moisture. Now, obviously now that's cooking, we're drawing out moisture from them mushrooms. Okay. So we want to keep this stirring. We want to dry this up a little bit. And in a minute, we're going to add in that garlic. But what I'm going to do with these courgette halves, now I've sort of wiped them out, dried them and got rid of the salt that's in them, we're going to lay them out on the baking trays, cut side up, on some parchment paper. So like I say, we're just laying these out onto this parchment paper, ready to fill them shortly. And then they will be going in that oven. I think I said to you 180. So let's just put that over there for now. So let's add the rest of, or more of the, well, pretty much the rest of that ingredients to that. Okay, you can see there's a lot of moisture coming out of that now. We do want a little bit of moisture in there, because we obviously want to be adding the flour and thickening this up a little bit. But the pulp is starting to soften up. Well, it has softened up. The mushrooms are getting softer. You might, if you want to chop their mushrooms up a little bit smaller. They're quite large mushrooms. But anyway, we're going to want the thyme at this stage, some salt, some pepper, and the garlic. And I need to get the salt off my hands before I drink my beer, because that would be salty and make me want to drink more. Heaven forbid. In goes that thyme. Some freshly ground black pepper. I'm not quite sure why people keep going on about freshly cracked black pepper. It was always ground. I'm not quite sure where this freshly cracked black pepper comes from, but it's ground pepper. We're grinding it. And then we want to add in that garlic, and then we're just going to carry on cooking that for a few more minutes. Okay, I'm going to mix all that in a minute, cook that through, and then we're getting close to sort of the bit where it goes in, back in the courgettes and in the oven. And then you're going to want your flour, 2 tablespoons I think I said of plain flour, and 240 of room temperature milk. I was saying, and then I sort of stepped back a bit about the name of the Canary Islands. So although they're now part of Spain, sort of linguistic, genetic and whatever archaeological evidence suggests actually they were originally inhabited about at least 2,000 years ago, possibly even 3,000, essentially by what appears to be people from North Africa, Amazingas or something like that, now known collectively, all these peoples, as Gunches or something like that. I don't know, I can't pronounce the word I do. But essentially more from Africa rather than from sort of Spain going down, if you like, or down and across. But there's various cave art, various things like that, and in fact they do believe that these indigenous people used to live in caves, many of which were like well above sea level. So it has been, prior to people being there, they had giant tortoises, giant rats, a whole variety of sort of creatures, if you like, that aren't there now. Right, at this point, what we're going to do is just going to sprinkle in that flour. Okay, and I just want to mix that in for about a minute or two. Now you need to cook the flour through a little bit, otherwise it does tend to make it be a little bit floury. And then we'll be using the milk, obviously, to make a little bit of a thick sauce. The flour should thicken it, but we just want to cook this for a minute or two just to get rid of that floury taste. Okay, so you know this is getting quite nice and, I wouldn't say mushy, but obviously we need something that we'll better easily spoon into these courgettes. Now in goes that milk. Okay, get rid of that, and now we just want to carry on mixing that in, okay, until obviously it all starts thickening up. Now, say to you about these indigenous peoples, the first people to have been credited with potentially visiting the Canary Islands, obviously apart from these people who came across from North Africa, was the Romans in about the 1st century or so. But they believe they may have also been visited by Phoenicians, the Greeks, and Carthaginians, something like that. And in fact, Augustus Caesar's protege, King Humour II, I think might be Nubian, he also apparently discovered the islands, and he's essentially credited with being the person who discovered the islands for the Western world. According to Pliny the Elder, when King Humour II visited, he found it uninhabited, but he found ruins of a small temple and other ruined buildings. So, which would imply that perhaps these indigenous people, for whatever reasons, were no longer there. Pliny the Elder also, by the way, this is starting to thicken up now with that flour. It's starting to thicken. So at this point, well, not this point, but in a minute, you're going to want half of that cheese. We've got about 240 grams of cheese, and we want half of it because that's going to go in there in a minute. So Pliny the Elder also talks about when the Canary Islands were sort of named as, well, not named, but he says how they had a vast multitude of dogs of very large size. But like I say, they weren't, or he wasn't referring to the domesticated dog that we think of today. He's really talking about seals and things like that. Okay, so just going to give that about another minute and then we'll add our cheese. What we should do, if we had fresh chives, they will go on at the very end, but I can only get dried chives. So because I don't think they'll be particularly nice dried on top of the finished product, I'm going to chuck them chives in there now. I'm just going to quickly stir them in, and then we want to turn the heat off, okay, before we add in that cheese. So now I've got that cheese, like I say, half of it, about 120 grams of it, and we're just going to, with the heat off, stir that through. So obviously there's quite a lot of cheese in this, okay, so we just want to melt this in, get this all mixed in together, and then this is our filling to go back in our courgette halves, if you like. The remaining cheese, the other 120 odd grams, is going to go over the top. So while I'm just mixing that in, just a few final things about the Canary Islands. Okay, I've already told you that he had all these sort of extinct, if you like, animals from the past. Nowadays they're visited by seals, 5 different species of turtle, including the more common endangered loggerhead turtle, often spotted along the shores of the Canary Islands. Lots of different cetaceans, many rare and not so well known versions are seen. Hooded seals come along every now and again. And like I say, they used to be, not so much now, but one of the rarest pinnipeds, rarest seals in the world, the Mediterranean monk seal. Right, so I think that cheese is now all in there, so it's time to start stuffing our courgettes. We're just taking this mixture and we're just adding it into those courgette canoes. Okay, I've already done half of them. Oops, he says, trying to knock them over the side there. Like I say, you might find, particularly with the size of these mushrooms, perhaps better to chop them up a little bit finer. Okay, so what you want to do is just go along and share this out. And actually, as it happens, I think I said to you 500 grams of button mushrooms. I've probably used about 400, to be honest, because as I started cutting them up, I did think to myself, there's an awful lot of mushroom here. Whoops. And some of it just fell over the side there. So you might want to either chop it a bit finer. So I've still got a bit in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to spread the remaining amount over the ones I've done already. Right, so now we're going to take this remaining cheese and we're just going to sprinkle a small amount over the top of each. Okay, now if you were using fresh chives, you still wouldn't be adding them just yet. You would add the chives after we bring them out the oven. Okay, they're now ready to go in that oven. Like I say, it's fan oven at 180, and we're going to cook them in there. Oops. Where's that not going in there? Messing me about. For about 20 minutes. Okay, essentially we want to make sure we cook them courgettes. I'm just serving this up. Okay, the courgettes looking nice and soft. So leave that to one side at the minute. So there we go, our Spanish stuffed courgettes with mushrooms primarily. Ooh, that plate's hot. Supposedly a speciality of the Canary Islands. But let's try it out. So I'll try and get a bit of that stuffing. This is the end bit, so obviously there's more courgette here than everything else. The courgette is cooked, not too mushy. Still got a nice little bit of crunch to it. You've got the cheese coming through. The definitely mushroom, an umami or whatever flavouring. Oh, the mushroom is the overpowering flavour, which ideally that's what you want. But you're getting the garlic. Well, getting a bit of cheese, bit of onion. Oh, that's another bit. But like I say, obviously not this much, but you can have this as like a tapas. You can have it as an appetizer. You can have it as an accompaniment to a main meal, or you can have it like we are. As a main meal. So there you have it. Your Bubangos Rellenos de Champiñones. Stuffed courgettes with garlic and mushrooms. The wife's moaning she's starving. Better get that to her.